The Persian Gulf has always been a strategic location which has attracted the attention of many empires and colonial powers. As a part of their plan to colonize the Middle East, the British made treaties of so-called protection with Arab sultans in the Persian Gulf in order to exploit strategic ports and resources. However, many rulers and tribes in the Gulf refused to be a part of the British colonial project. The biggest threat to British interests in the Persian Gulf was the Arab tribe known as the Qawasim tribe. The Qawasim tribe was an influential tribe that ruled the port cities of Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah. In the early 1800s, the Qawasim had the most powerful navy in the Arabian Gulf. After the rise of the economic and military power of the British Empire in India, the Persian Gulf became more important for the British. Anyone who opposed the British dominance of the Persian Gulf was eliminated by force. However, the Qawasim tribe refused to allow the British to threaten their trade and livelihood. Therefore, Arab pirates from the Qawasim tribe began to hijack and loot British ships in the Persian Gulf. In 1809, the British bombarded the Qawasim's base in the port city of Ras Al Khaimah. After a fierce battle, the Qawasim were defeated and were forced to sign a peace treaty. However, this treaty did not last long, as the Qawasim began attacking British ships once again and conducted a surprise attack on the strategic port of Bandar Abbas, which was controlled by the British-backed Sultan of Oman. After taking control of Bandar Abbas, the Qawasim now had control of the entry into the Persian Gulf. This was a huge threat to British navigation in the Gulf, as it meant that the British could no longer enter the Gulf from India. Therefore, the British began to plan a military expedition that aimed to put an end to the Qawasim tribe and their influence in the Gulf. In the year 1819, a British naval force led by William Keir Grant attacked the base of the Qawasim in the port of Ras Al Khaimah. After a bloody war that lasted 1 month, the Qawasim were defeated and the British took control of Ras Al Khaimah. The leader of the Qawasim, known as Hassan bin Rahma al-Qasimi, surrendered to the British. After defeating the Qawasim, the British seized all of their weapons and ships and prevented them from building new vessels. Therefore, the influence of the Qawasim tribe in the Persian Gulf came to an end, and the area that is now known as the UAE was made into a British protectorate. However, the British continued to face resistance in the Persian Gulf. For example, shortly after eliminating the Qawasim, the British were unable to defeat the famous Arab pirate known as Rahma bin Jabir al-Jalhami. Rahma bin Jabir frequently sacked and looted British ships in the Persian Gulf. In the year 1821, the British attacked his base in Qatar with large warships, killing dozens of civilians. However, Rahma bin Jabir managed to escape the attack. Rahma bin Jabir al-Jalhami continued to attack British ships as he constantly moved between different ports in the Persian Gulf, and he remained a threat to the British until his death in 1828. In the year 1885, Sheikh Qasim bin Muhammad al-Thani, who was the new ruler of Qatar, expelled all British ships from his coast in order to prevent the British from monopolizing the pearl trade. He rejected British imperialism and refused to allow his state to become a British protectorate. However, many of his policies were reversed shortly after his death. The British also faced resistance from other rebellious tribes like the Qawasim in the Gulf and in other parts of the Arabian Peninsula. For example, in the 1920s, the British faced the enmity of the Al-Mutair and Al-Utaybi tribes, who launched raids from Saudi Arabia into British-occupied Iraq, Jordan and Kuwait, as they rejected the artificial borders created by the British. In the early 1930s, oil was discovered in the Persian Gulf, and British companies began extracting oil and depriving the people of its profits. In 1938, a group of Kuwaiti activists called on the British-backed King of Kuwait to distribute oil revenues more fairly, and they demanded the establishment of an assembly in order to manage the finances of the country. However, the British did not approve of this, and they imprisoned many activists. As a result, huge anti-British protests erupted across Kuwait. The British reacted with violence and shot and killed many protesters, including the famous political activist known as Abdul Karim al-Munais. In 1965, the British forcibly removed the anti-British ruler of Sharjah, known as Sultan bin Saqr al-Qasimi. Sultan bin Saqr al-Qasimi was a descendant of the famous Qawasim tribe, and he demanded the end of the British protectorate and the creation of an independent state. The same year, massive protests led by Ali Qasim Rabi'i erupted in Bahrain after hundreds of workers were sacked by the British Bahraini Oil Company. The British used force against protesters, killing 6 civilians. Eventually, after years of anti-British struggles, the Gulf states finally gained independence. However, after the British left the Gulf, this gave way to the rise of American influence in the region.